Okay, now we are down to the last approach, or chapter 6, the communicative language teaching or the communicative approach. Now, I think this is one of my most favorite approaches because I think it's effective. As a teacher, I have applied this and I consider this very effective approach. If you want to use this, you can. But if you want to use other um, approaches, you're very much welcome. So now I think I would be very impressed if like I consider an approach very traditional, but you were able to, stitch through it and make it as engaging and as effective as possible. I'd be very impressed with that. But if you want to go on the easy way, you use communicative approach. Now, there are many different methods for teaching English as a second language. You all know that we actually went through the first four, right? Some of them say that memorizing grammar, GTM, is the most important step for learning a language. While others believe that the language will be learned through speaking and listening, like indirect method. Now, in this course, we will follow a method called the communicative approach. Now, what is the communicative approach? It states that when students communicate with each other, they learn a language very quickly. Still, the exposure of the students to people who are speaking the target language. Because of this, classes that use this approach are rarely quiet. There's always people talking. Speaking is the most important activity in every lesson when you're going to apply the communicative approach. Although speaking is the most important skill, language skill that is used in the communicative class, the other three, which are listening, reading, and writing, are also very important. And communicative approach also targets these other um, macro skills as well. So what are the communicative approach terminologies that you have to remember? We have the BIG, the realia, and of course, the language functions. I'll be explaining them, and of course, I will be giving examples on how to apply these terminologies of communicative approach. We'll start with BIG, or BIG. Now, this acronym stands for background, interests, and goals of the students. The teacher must learn the BIG of the students so that he or she can prepare lessons that are interesting and important for them. Just like what I have explained, I don't know if you are my students in teaching profession or in um, child and adolescent, but when you become teachers in the future, the very first thing that you do on the first day of class is, of course, you have a survey, some of a survey of like an interview where you identify the weaknesses, strengths, capabilities, hobbies, interests, likes and dislikes of your students. This is going to greatly help you in choosing which strategy or approach that you're going to use for these children, for these learners. So BIG stands for background, interests, and goals of students. The teacher must learn the BIG of the students so that he or she can prepare lessons that are interesting and important for them. So if your students, the interests, majority of your students, their interests are K-pop, you must find ways to incorporate K-pop in the teaching of the English language so that it would be very interesting for them. And if they find the subject or the lesson interesting, they can retain information very, very well. Next is realia. I know you're no longer unfamiliar with this term. Realia, this means real objects. So this means real object from the world outside of the classroom. So by bringing realistic objects in the classroom, it prepares the students to communicate in the real world. So I'll be showing you an example later. Now, what those traditional approaches failed to incorporate in their techniques is that language teaching, you must be able to find ways to incorporate language teaching in the real world. Okay, you should not enclose your students in the four corners of the classrooms and just let them learn about rules of grammar. This is verb, this is noun, this is etc. This is okay when this is the form of the subject, this is the form of the verb. How are they able to have meaningful learning if they cannot connect what they have learned, the input that they have, to the outside world, to the real world? Okay, that's why it's important to also bring realia when you are teaching English, when you're teaching the target language. Next is language functions. This is a situation topic. I mean, say situation topic. When we study a topic, we generally only learn vocabulary that relates to it. I'll show you examples of situation later. When we study a language form, we learn the language needed to function in certain Simply learning vocabulary cannot prepare the students for communication in the real world. Again, I repeat, I think the reason why I like the communicative approach very much is that not only that it teaches learners about the rules of grammar, anything, any theoretical knowledge, but also there is the involvement of the relation between information about your target language and how we can apply it outside in the real world. Okay. Simply learning vocabulary cannot prepare the students for communication in the real world, as I mentioned. They must learn expressions and ways to explain what they are talking about. Examples of language functions can be found on the next pages. I will be posting this learning material as well. So dito tayo sa BIG. So what are the sample questions that you can give so that you can acquire the BIG of your students? So what's your background? Describe your family. Where are you from? Where have you lived before? What are your interests? What are your hobbies? What do you generally do in your free time? So what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? What are your plans after, etc. So these are just examples. By the way, this is a TESOL learning material. That's why you can see that these, of course, the questions are anchored to TESOL. Okay, so those are examples of questions that you can throw to your students when you want to get their BIG, background, interests, and goals. What about realia? In the classroom, it is important to use real objects and materials as much as possible. This will make the classes more realistic and relevant for the students because, di ba nga, that's why we, barely learn about mathematics, and that most of us hate mathematics because we always think, paano ko ba maa-apply ang AX plus BY plus C sa pagbili ko ng pagkain sa tindahan, sa pagbili ko nasa mall, sa pag-iipon ko? Kasi we cannot seem to make a connection of this information into the real world. That's why the retention of information or knowledge is not really successful most of the time. So that's why if you want to teach mathematics or you want to teach language, there really must be a connection to the real world. Okay, when you bring in realia, make sure it is something that the students can use benefit from. So we have here examples of objects that would be appropriate in the classroom. We have bank forms, okay? So in an activity, if you're discussing about nouns, you make them fill bank forms with information needed. Post office, task sheets, it's about job applications, or you make them write letters, application letter for when they apply to college, or application letter when you apply a job, or even course registrations. Meron ding labels like medicine bottles, it's clothing. So what do you think about the clothing? Is it okay to have it washed inside a washing machine? So you are igniting, the use of the target language while at the same time using realia that is, relevant to the students, something that they will encounter in real life. First aid, even beauty products. So if you've seen that majority of the interests of your students are about makeup, then you can use beauty products and you can discuss, the ingredients or even the directions. That's also one way of teaching learners about the target language, or even assembly instruction, operating instruction, and recipes, etc. So there are other realias that you can use that are included in this learning material. They're very helpful. I've used this when I was having my internship when I was in fourth year college. Very effective. I got an applause from my cooperating teacher because of that. What about sample language function? Situation. So you let them imagine, for example, that they're going to the doctor. But there are specific words or vocabulary that are involved when you go to the doctor. So the development or the establishing of these specific words or jargons that are involved in certain situations, you can teach them in using this language function. So going to the doctor, what are the dialogue or conversations usually involved in that situation? And meeting people, what are the conversations that people have when they meet each other, or telling the time? What time is it? Oh, it's so what are the proper things to say? So you let them experience that. You choose situations from this given example. See, there are a lot, and in this case, you are exposing the learners. You're not only teaching the learners about the information regarding the target language, but you're exposing them on how it is used in real life. That's why I like communicative approach. Okay, so ayan, I have other examples on how to do communicative language teaching here. You can just browse it and read it so that you can also have information when it comes to using or applying communicative language approach in your lesson plan. So what are the necessary components of a communicative lesson? So in all communicative lessons, there are 3 elements that you must do: warm up, instruction, and practice. So warm up refers to the point in the lesson where the teacher creates an interest in the day's topic. So when you're going to talk about verbs, so you start off with like, what did you do today? Oh, mom, I ate this. Oh, I went to the mall, etc. So warm them up. Kumbaga pa, if this is a motorcycle, broom broom, you do that para mag-warm up so that the motorcycle is ready for action. So that's basically what you're doing with your students. This is generally achieved by asking questions and having a general discussion about the day's topic. This is an example that I've given a while ago. If you're going to discuss about verbs, then you warm them up by asking questions like, what did you do last night? Like, what are the activities that you did this morning, etc. Next is instruction, or the teaching of new language. This refers to the point in the lesson where the teacher presents the new language or the lesson for the target language. At this point, new vocabulary and expressions are introduced in order to do the communicative activity that will follow. And of course, we now have the practice or the communicative activity. So after the giving of the lesson about verbs, you proceed now with the activity. This refers to the point in the lesson where the students use the new language introduced in a free and communicative way. Unlike, what do you call this? Direct method, errors are very much welcomed in communicative approach. The students will take part in a communicative activity. That's why I've mentioned a while ago that this is rarely a silent approach, because there is a lot of talking done for this approach. It is necessary that the free activity practices what was taught. Okay, it would pwede na, okay, you discuss what you usually do, and the rules and regulations, etc. Tapos wala na din na-apply ang lesson. Nabuang na. There must be a clear, what do you call this, application of the lesson. Okay. Actually, yung lesson plan na i-present ko about linguistics, yung lesson plan ko, it uses a communicative approach, and I will show you that later. So other information are also here. You can read this so that you will have a guide, on how to do communicative approach. So that ends my discussion for chapter 6. Now, for the next video, I am now going to introduce to you my sample lesson plans and ano yung mga technicalities and processes involved in this 2 samples of lesson plan.